There's something wrong with America. The nation is sick, and it has been for a very long time.
Well, there's two things I need to know before I can answer that. First is, how much time do we have?
All the time you need.
And the second thing is, what kind of whiskey did you bring me? No, it's been a long journey, but I say it's a long journey. It seems short, right? Just a couple years.
Right.
But the problem is that you run into is with American Christianity being so devoid of value. You kind of come to this end point with it. It all ends in chaos, and I think that's a lot of similar experience with a lot of Christians, and that's why modern Protestantism or heterodoxy seems to be failing everywhere now. It's just kind of falling apart. I was a Baptist, I think, right before the end there, and that was just not it wasn't a good experience. That was actually a very bad experience, but it was a long road. I mean, that took me all my life to get to that point where I was willing to just ask the question and say, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I wasn't right about all of that. And so that got me thinking. And I had done a lot of research on the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, for the book Tears for Byzantium. And I remembered along the way that they had a Christian empire for 1100 some years. And I wondered, where did that church go? What happened to them? Or did they just fizzle out? Did they die off? Because I only studied them up to about 1453, to the time they fell. And I didn't really look into it after that. But I remember there was a church there. So I began to do some research. And it didn't take very long at all before you understand that is the Orthodox Church. It was the Orthodox Church then. It is so now, and with the 14 jurisdictions. So with that in mind, that's what I pursued. And I showed up at the door of the Orthodox Church by myself one Sunday morning, and I walked into the church kind of early, and the tonsure reader greeted me, and he said, "Have you ever been to an Orthodox church before?" And he obviously knew that I hadn't. He could tell. I guess there's a way you tell, right? And I just looked at this fella and I said, "Well, I know nothing about Christianity. Let's just start there." So this was a good way to approach Orthodoxy, to just wipe the slate clean and say, you know what, everything I know or think that I know, I don't really know. There's been too many gaps. There's too many misteachings. There's too much clutter. There's too much of my own pride. I've given it everything I can do to understand this faith, and nothing's worked because of these problems. So that brought me to Orthodoxy. And then 2020 happened. So that was a couple years later, and we had this giant political narrative of pandemic and death and all this other stuff. A lot of fear mongering, which is now all being uncovered, of course. But at the time, a lot of the churches were being shut down. They were being pushed into the non-essential world, right? Everything's at that time it was either essential or non-essential. Here in North Carolina, the governor decided rather arbitrarily that you could have 7 people in your church, and so the Orthodox community that I was in followed lockstep and basically shut out and excommunicated, if you will, in effect, the entire parish except seven people, and that didn't sit well. I knew it was wrong, and so I gathered up several of our faithful. We started looking at options to see if there could be an option for a parish under another jurisdiction. In September 16th in 2020, we were blessed to begin St. Timothy's here in Hickory under the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. Yeah, so the traditional way of doing things doesn't work. The traditional way we're taught is, as American Christians, is, well, you're an adult now, you need to go find the church where you fit. Okay, and what that means is that in practice is I go to church A, and If I don't fit in over there, or something bad happens, or it doesn't match my worldview, then I pull up my roots there and I go down the street to church B. And I try to do the same thing there. I go in there and try to fit in with those people and all that stuff. And then I think about their doctrine and, does it fit? Is it a good fit? And if it's not, then I pull up roots there and I go down here to church C. And you just continue this process, right, until you find one that they say, oh, feels like home. If that is the only value that Christianity offers, then it's worthless, because anybody can make up any church setting they want, call it Christianity, and as long as it fills your need, then you're gonna stay. It doesn't matter whether or not it's right doctrine or any of that other stuff. It doesn't matter if it's correct. It just matters if it feels good to me. And if Christianity is going to be a feel-good religion, and that's all it is, it's no wonder why the millennials and Gen Zs are looking at this and saying, this is really a worthless faith. Well, where's the value? Where's the substance? Where's the concrete absolutes? And these, you find these venues, they just can't deliver that. They're all associations, clubs, etc., sects, if you will. But they're not going to deliver these things because they can't. So I was not an Orthodox Christian when I wrote the book. In fact, the book ends just as I approach Orthodoxy. So it's not this kind of a text where it's a cheerleader for the Orthodox faith. In fact, it's really more of an indictment of the system that we have. And I didn't really look to judge, the Orthodox Church one way or another. I spent a lot of time talking in this book about sola scriptura, and really the outcome of this disastrous idea of sola scriptura, which has now been even twisted into something more solo scriptura. Take a guy like John MacArthur. Not too long ago, he preached that the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox preach a false gospel. Orthodox and Roman Catholics connect faith and works together for salvation. Well, not only did the soundbite that he had, his little sermonette, really distort the doctrine and dogma of the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox, but he calls on us to be cursed. His word. So this is a fellow who's really not interested in learning the truth. This is a fellow who's interested in his solo interpretation. I can only imagine that a guy like John MacArthur has never read the book of James, for example, because I don't know what he would do with the book of James. This is problematic, but I'm just picking on him, but you can find this in any church you want to go to. You have, some of these churches, these venues, they'll tell you, well, you can do this, but you can't do that. And you go to another one and it's the opposite. They're all in disarray and disagreement. I don't believe that for a minute that Christ established a Christian faith or a Christian church to be opposed and in turmoil against opposing forces all the time. That's not how it was in the first century or the second century or the third century. You had heresies and heretics that came to attack the church. And those heresies were put down. They were rightfully and justfully dealt with. And that's why you had these 7 ecumenical councils. But the 7 ecumenical councils they're denied by Protestantism today. They don't give them any authority whatsoever, which is ironic, because out of those councils came the Codex of the Bible that they claim is their authority. Now, nowhere in the Bible does the Bible even say it is the authority over the church. Neither does Paul declare that. Neither does Christ declare that. Christ didn't deliver books to us. He didn't leave 12 copies of the Bible and hand them out and say, here you go, fellas, here's 12. I only brought 12 with me. Sorry, you're going to have to make copies. That didn't happen. The Bible didn't arrive via Christ. It didn't drop out of the sky. It was brought forward by the church. And when I say the church, I'm talking about the pre-schism church, right? So that would have been the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox. Before they were Roman Catholic and Orthodox, they were together. So this was a book of the church. It's a book by the church, and it is a book for the church. It is not a book that is whose purpose is to have individuals walking around hitting people over the head with it or taking it and misusing it although that's been done forever. So the Orthodox way, that does away with all of that. The Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholics as well, they rely on patristics. They rely on the agreement of saints and theologians throughout the 2,000 years. They've weeded out heresy. Heresy has been combated all along the way, and this was a refreshing thing to me to learn. It was like, so there actually is something that's right, something that's true. You can actually get to truth. You go into a Protestant church, you ask them, where's the truth? And all you're going to get is someone's opinion of the Bible or opinion of the truth. But in the Orthodox faith, you actually get there. You actually get the meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to that. And I thought, well, that's refreshing. Someone's going to tell you the truth.
Thank goodness MacArthur figured it out for us.
What would we do without John MacArthur?
What would we do? We'd be lost. We'd be cursed still, apparently.
Right. The American psyche, the American ethos is different than the ethos of the Orthodox faith and Christianity, genuine Christianity in general. And why do I say that? Well, as you said, you have a lot of individualism with Americanism. This rugged individualism, this, it's all about me. I can figure this out. I can do this. I'm going to do that. We don't vote collectively. We vote individually, right, in a civic sense. But there's a kind of it's not just a dichotomy. It's really more of a psychological problem. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where you basically have these two groups of thought, and they're in each of us, right? As Americans, we say on the civic side, we're independent. We rejected the King of England. We rejected monarchy. We're not going to have anyone telling us what to do, and we're going to vote for our officials every 2 years, every 4 years. We're going to turn over government. On the civic side, that's according to our Constitution. Now, you say that, we're a Christian nation, we're based on Christian values. There is some of that. The problem there is whose Christian values were they? Were they the Mormons? Were they the Baptists? Were they the Methodists? Were they you go down the list. I know a lot of those groups weren't around, but my point is that these weren't Christian values of the Roman Catholic Church necessarily. These were Christian values of reformers. Mm-hmm. And as we demonstrated today, I mean, you can look around, the attitudes and mores of current Christianity is all over the map. You got one church that says, we don't approve of abortion here. And then you got another church that says, not only do we approve of abortion, but we're marrying homosexuals. So there is no standardization of morals. They all point back to the Bible, but they're all pointing back to their false interpretation of it. And again, you have this problem. So in a civic sense, we're over here saying we're independent. We reject kings. If I'm a Christian, if I'm over here and I say I'm a Christian, that's a problem, because Christianity it is not a representative republic like America.
Right.
Christ has established a kingdom. Mm-hmm. Well, that means he is a sovereign.
Yeah. He
He is a monarch. He's the King of Kings. We have to accept that, but we don't. We don't want to accept that. So we tend to call him the King of Kings, but we don't treat him like the King of Kings. We don't follow Christianity. We lead Christianity. We take Christian values, we think, and then we try to apply them over here to this. And then we take our civic values and we bleed them over here to Christianity. We don't follow the things of the church, of Christ and his church. We try to steer the things of Christianity. And this is a real problem, I think, psychologically with American Christians. And that was really one of the reasons I wrote this book. Imagine this. So you have individuals coming into the country. They're on the front page of every newspaper all over the internet. And these individuals claim to be Americans. If you take one of these individuals that is violent, they're out in the streets burning vehicles and doing whatever, they're here illegally. If you interview that person and you ask them, you say you're an American, what is it about you that's an American? And this individual would have to say something like, well, I don't like your laws, so I came across the border illegally. I don't believe I need that. I don't like your flag, so I'm going to burn your American flag while I wave my flag in the street, right? I'm not going to pledge allegiance to your flag. I don't like your elected officials, so I will threaten to kill them, and I will work around them any way I can. I'll take your free stuff if you offer it, but I'm not gonna work and pay taxes. How is that individual an American? By any definition, someone who does that is not an American, right? We have the same example, or similar, I should say, in Christianity. We have people who say, I am a Christian. And to that person, we can ask them, do you believe that Christ left us a church? Well, he left us a lot of churches. Oh, okay. What about the creed? Well, we don't recite the creed because we're non-creedal. So we reject the creed of 381. We don't do creeds. Oh, okay. Well, what about the church calendar? Do you observe the church calendar? No, we don't do that. We don't have 12 feasts. We don't do that stuff. We use the civic calendar instead. Oh, okay. Well, what about the 7 ecumenical councils? Oh, you don't give any credibility to the 7 ecumenical councils. What about patristics? Well, you don't need patristics, right? Because you interpret the Bible yourself. What about the sacraments? Well, we don't do sacraments at my church. We don't believe in sacraments. So at the end of this train, you could ask the exact same question. How are you a Christian? Because you just self-proclaimed that you're a Christian? For these individuals, they don't see a problem with that. A lot of people don't see a problem with that. And it is a problem. It's a huge problem. And that's what you have today, where you have this breakdown in unity, and you have this breakdown in morals and ethics, because everyone's redefining their own truth. And there can't be, 300 million plus versions of truth. That's impossible.
So do you believe in separation of church and state?
I think it depends on which church and which state you're talking about.
Fair enough.
You could argue that point either way. The Byzantines had a Christian nation for 1150 years, and they were managed and mismanaged well and improperly. I mean, it depends on what century you want to look at. They had good leaders and bad leaders. They had good emperors, they had bad emperors. They had good patriarchs, and they had some really bad patriarchs. So that's an open-ended, ongoing argument. We probably at this point have the best laid plan for civil government that exists at this point. Is it the best laid plan ever? I don't know, probably the best one we've seen, but I don't know that a better one won't come along. Okay, and again, it depends on if you were to say Christianity should take over government. The first thing you'd have to answer is which Christianity.
Right.
And you can't answer that question. So the problem is embedded in the question.
For sure.
So I would say the jury is out on that. We've certainly seen worse. We wouldn't want an atheist government, because that would be like Soviet Union. We saw what happened there.
Yeah.
So we know that's what happens when you have an atheist government. Question here is really another question, and the question is, why are we mining?
Right.
Why are we doing these things? Why are we digging gold? Why are we pursuing this wealth? And the question is, are we doing that for God's glory ultimately, or are we doing it to feed our own greed? So it depends on the motivation and what your purported outcome is going to be.
Sure.
If all we're going to do is pursue an avenue of greed and all that goes with that, the outcome of that will be destruction.
So I guess that kind of leads into how would you define a true Christian nation? Like, what is the ideal, as far as you can tell, in that, in terms of government, in terms of whatever social programs are involved, just however you slice it?
Well, the only example we have that is something that we can ponder, and again, it wasn't a perfect system, but would be the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire. I'm not saying that we should model America after that. That would be a very difficult and strange kind of a task. It would take it would take generations for people to shift their mindset in that way. But if you look at the Eastern Roman Empire, they functioned very well when they functioned with honest people who were leading them. But there you had this dichotomy. You had this kind of a working together but separate, where church and state worked together but had separate domains. And there was some friction along the way too. You had times where the emperor would try to assert himself over the church, and you had some times where the church did the same thing and tried to assert its authority over the emperor's activities. But in general, that cohesiveness worked together for a very long time. So I think if you look at some examples of time periods within the Byzantine Empire, you can see some very good and very clear positive outcomes that they've experienced. And there were lots of times of prosperity, but the same things that affected them affect us. Greed and dishonesty, incompetence, all of these things, bureaucracy. They had those problems too.
Right.
And those problems were too big for them to solve. And so that's how they ended up basically not being an empire anymore. I mean, as long as they're content to customize their Christianity to suit their needs, and as long as they're able in their mind and comfortable with creating a false Christ in their head, that'll continue, and it will destroy them. I mean, it's going to destroy the nation. It won't help us if all we have is Christ in our mind, and it's a Christ that we created. We're in trouble, and that's a very very difficult path to get out of. It leads to nihilism and all this other stuff, atheism. There has no good end to that.
Right.
Well, I've met with a lot of Christians, self-proclaimed. I've met with a lot of folks that are disillusioned. I'll have coffee with just about anybody. And so I meet a lot of people, and they all seem to have a very similar note, and that is, I have tried all those religions. I've tried them all. I've tried all the denominations. I've been around, I've seen all that. I'm smarter than that now. I know better, and I'm not going to fall for that. So whatever you're selling, I'm not going to buy it. And then, immediately the conversation turns to the fact that, well, I'm not selling anything. I don't get a free toaster if you show up at the Orthodox Church. Okay, they're still not handing out toasters. But Christ left us something. He left us His church. So if you're a Christian and you're genuinely trying to seek Christ, you're seeking after Christ, you have to believe that there is a church. Mm-hmm. The question is, how do you filter out the noise? And history helps you do that. The lens of history helps you focus on getting rid of that noise and that background. When you start going backwards in time and you look and you say, well, where did the Baptists come from? Where did the Lutherans come from? Where did the Methodists come from? And you can keep on going backwards to a time where there really just was one faith, one church. The Catholic Church, right? Mm-hmm. Catholic meaning all together. That word first showed up in a letter around 100 AD, and it just means it's Katholika. It means all together, and that was the first time it was used to describe Christians. Today we use that word, right? So that word is used, and you say Catholic, they mean Roman Catholic, mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily so, right? So Orthodox are Catholic too. They're just not Romans. So I think what happens is if people have a lot of mental roadblocks about damage that they've experienced in the past, and disappointment, and sometimes anger at God and anger at men. These are things that they have to work through to get past it. I work through mine by simply saying, I'm just going to wipe the slate clean, and I'm just going to say, you know what, I don't know anything. And that was probably the best thing I've ever done in my life, was to say, I just don't know it. I'm going to let go of my pride, and I'm going to come in here and say, whatever this is, teach it to me. And I don't judge the Orthodox faith. I don't judge the Orthodox Church. It's not my role. It's not my place. This is High Church. This is Christ Church. This is not my playground. Okay, so I don't get to worm my way into a committee to shift policy of my church. The doctrine and the dogma of the Orthodox faith has been around since the beginning. That's not a place where we inject ourselves. Even the clergy, that's just not a place they inject themselves. They call that tradition, and we hold to the traditions. That's what Paul told Timothy to do. I didn't have any visceral reactions to anything. There was a lot of confusion, but I maintained the open mind of, I don't understand what this is, but I'm going to get somebody to tell me what it is and teach what that is. I would go to church services that I didn't understand. Sometimes they were rather bizarre to me, where you'd stand in a line and they would come by with a prayer, and the priest was, putting holy oil on your forehead and, speaking a different language or something. I didn't understand what any of that was, but, I did it faithfully. I did it in faith. I wasn't going to be that guy that says, hold on a second, my Bible doesn't say, no. And, after the service, I got a moment with the priest, and I'm like, can you help me understand what just happened? And he was like, oh yeah, well, here's the thing. And he explained what this was. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Of course. Yes, of course it is. So I've kind of understood that there's not things to be, upset about like that. It's really more of things I don't know.
Right. And
so you have to maintain humility to understand there are things you just don't know and things that you need to learn. A kindergartner in school is not, he's not going to have, you're not going to give that guy trigonometry, right? He's going to be learning something else at 5 years old. Okay. And that's the same way here. You learn things as it is appropriate for you to learn them. But there's always an answer, and that's the other thing. There's nothing secret. There's no secret handshakes. Everything is published. You can learn it. There's obviously, there's a book on it. Whatever it is, there's a book on it, I'm sure. Orthodox are big on that. They have lots of resources. And yet I say that, but I do want people to understand that, my experience with Orthodoxy is not a cerebral exercise. It's not an academic pursuit.
Right.
Those are not reasons to come to the Orthodox faith. There is an Orthodox ethos, and it is here, not here. So that's a different conversation,
right.
But it's important for people to understand that you're not going to pick Orthodoxy apart with books. That would be over 10,000 denominations telling you something different. You have all these people and they can't agree on anything. How can you be a Christian nation? We're probably a Christian nation by default.
Right.
We're a Christian nation because we're not something else, because we're not Hindu, we're not Muslim, we're not Taoist. At this point, we're really not a Christian nation. You got John MacArthur who wants us cursed. How are we a Christian nation? Other denominations that throw rocks continually at the Roman Catholics or the Orthodox. We were at our parish not long ago. We had Protestant protesters marching up and down the sidewalk outside while we had divine liturgy. How are we a Christian nation? How is that possible?
Right.
So these are all problems that I have. Look at our actions nationally, just as a American ethos. If you abuse your dog, or you go away for the weekend and you don't feed your cat, and someone finds out about that, you'll be arrested and you'll be put in jail for animal abuse. And yet, you can take your child and rip it out of your womb, and that's legal, and no one goes to jail. The church long ago forbade abortion. That is, and I'm talking the pre-1054 church. Long ago, it was established. St. John Chrysostom even said that abortion is worse than murder, because with abortion, you're preventing a life from even being born. It is murder in every case. And yet, it's celebrated here, and it's even talked about as a right. It's a right. How are we a Christian nation? You can fly the American flag, you can fly the pride flag, but you can take the American flag and you can step on it, put it on the ground and light it on fire and burn it, and that's free expression. You do that with the pride flag, you're going to jail. How are we a Christian nation?
That says something about who's really pulling the strings.
Correct.
Yeah.
So how are we a Christian nation? We're not. We imagine that we are, and that's probably a bigger problem. I would summarize the book this way: American Christians, this is your wake-up call. If you're not paying attention, and you're maybe a little lost on the whole Christian thing, this is a book that's going to help you sort through that. I take the readers through a little whirlwind tour of Christian history during Roman times and forward. It's not very long. I have a chapter on the Roman Catholic Church, which probably doesn't do justice to them, so with apologies. There's a chapter on the Orthodox there, and then there's several chapters talking about how American churches deal with society now, and what they stand for, what they represent. It's kind of frightening. I don't pick on all of them because the book is only, can only make 400 pages, do so much. But there's also a bibliography there if you need more resources, and there's also a very curious timeline in the back, a chronology of church history. So those are all useful tools. And really what I hope people will get out of this book is I just want them to think for themselves. Open your mind and think. I don't necessarily want people to agree with me. I just want them to use their gray matter.
It's a big ask.
It is a big ask today. Put your cell phone down and crack a book. Again, all the ancient resources are available. So when you're ready to seriously look into something, you're going to reach, for the binary ordinal organization of knowledge, or the book, rather than the tablet. I would tell those individuals, and I have told them, several of them, have faith that God is sovereign. He knows you better than you know you. So don't try to outthink God and his plan. Just try to accept what it's going to be. Well, who would want to set foot on this rock sober? Well, again, if you're making up your own rules,
right,
you can pretty much make up whatever you want. And the temperance movement, 100 years ago, came out of a lot of these, religious or quasi-religious mores. There was a lot of things going on, but the temperance movement turned, it actually was proven to be a failure. Obviously we had the amendment, we banned it, and then we had the amendment that got rid of the amendment. So we've proven that, forced temperance in that respect
doesn't work.
It was a really bad idea. It did not just work, but we created an entire class of crime that didn't exist prior. So this is a real problem. So
right.
we created more problems than we had solutions. But if you get into that whole discussion, there were other things going on. I say, what other things were going on? Well, whiskey wasn't even whiskey up until 1897 when you had the Bottled in Bond Act. You had whiskey that was cut with things like kerosene and rubbing alcohol by rectifiers. That was your whiskey,
right?
And it was killing people. So there's a lot of differences in today's complex beverage called whiskey versus whiskey back in the day. Okay, so there's a lot of different things aren't the same. Drinking water is better for you today than it was then, even though it's arguably still not the greatest. So a lot of things have changed that way. So you can't take these things in today's context of what happened yesterday.